So today we're going to do chapter 12, and this is estimating loss in value, accrued depreciation. So let's talk a little bit about depreciation. In accounting, we have capital assets. So if you're talking about a company that has specific assets that they use in relation to their business, you can purchase specific assets as a company, and over time, those assets will waste, right? So basically what it means is that as time goes on, then it's going to be maybe less productive, or it might become obsolete. And so what you do with the money that you spend on these capital assets is you depreciate them over a specific time frame. So let's use an example. Let's say you're buying a computer system for a small retail store and you spend $3,000 on it. Okay? Now let's say that the depreciation period for this computer system is 5 years. In a 5-year time frame, that means you're going to depreciate $600 a year for each year that you hold the asset. So $3,000 divided by 5-year time frame, that's $600 a year that you can depreciate. And so that's basically what we're talking about when we talk about depreciation of an asset. The example that I just gave you with the computer system that we're depreciating over a 5-year time frame, that is what we call book depreciation. Now, in book depreciation, we're using the actual cost of the object and then we're depreciating it from there. Now, obviously, this is not an accounting class, this is an appraisal class. So in appraisal, it's going to be a little bit different. This is an example of appraisal depreciation. And we're doing depreciation as a percentage. Now, obviously, that percentage is going to change depending on what type of property you're looking at. And here again, this is where doing a lot of appraisals is going to give you way more experience, and it's going to make you much better at actually estimating what the depreciation of an object is. But appraisal depreciation is going to include a percentage of what you think the depreciation of the property is. So here we have actual depreciation, and this is what we are using in appraisal. There are several different ways that you can determine what the depreciation of the property is, and we're going to look at some of those different ways. The first one is cost to cure. We also have age life, we have sales data, and we also have rental loss. So we're going to look at all of those different examples. Now, how is actual depreciation applied? It is a deduction from the current replacement cost. So you have to figure out, if we built this building today, how much would it cost? And then you subtract depreciation from that. So in appraisal, it's referred to as accrued depreciation. And accrued depreciation is the difference between the market value of a building and the total cost to replace it if it was brand new. We're going to look at the 3 different types of accrued depreciation. Now, the first 2 types that we have here are physical deterioration and functional obsolescence. Now, what you need to know is that those 2 different types of depreciation lie within the property itself. Okay? Physical deterioration is things like aging, wear and tear on the house. So it's things that you're going to have to repair after a certain amount of time goes by. Like, for instance, if you have a 20-year roof, by year 18 or 19, you're going to start to notice, hey, the roof needs to be replaced. That's physical deterioration. It just occurs over time. Other things that would be included in that would be like needing to paint, or maybe replacing windows that were getting older. If they're wood windows, they're going to have rot. If they're aluminum windows, they are not going to rot, but you might start to see that they begin to fog or glaze over. Functional obsolescence, on the other hand, has to do with changes in preferences of buyers. So if you think about properties that were built back in the 1960s and 70s, the houses were really small and they built really small rooms. Bathrooms were not big, and all of the windows were really tiny too. So you would have a small kitchen, you'd have a small dining room, you'd have a family room. Everything was really choppy in houses that were built back then. Houses that you build today are open floor plan, open concept. Everything sort of blends into, every room blends into the next, right? Just like the house that we actually did an appraisal on. The kitchen opened up into the family room, opened up into the dining area. So when you look at properties today versus what they used to look like, the preferences of buyers has changed. So is that going to decrease the value of a property if it's older? Possibly, yes. So things that are out of date, small bathrooms, really weird floor plans, all of those are examples of functional obsolescence. And then the last type of depreciation that we have here is external obsolescence. It's also referred to as economic obsolescence, so you may see it that way as well. External obsolescence is exterior to the boundaries of the property, so it's outside of the boundaries of the property itself. So this is going to be something that would be like environmental. Maybe you have increased traffic in a particular area. Maybe you have a conversion of the neighborhood from residential to rental. Maybe there is a decline in demand, so that would be an economic circumstance. So these are all things that you have no control over. There's nothing that you can do. So that is an example of external obsolescence. Looked at the three different types of accrued depreciation. We have physical deterioration, functional obsolescence, and we also have external obsolescence. Now, here's the thing about depreciation. Some depreciation you can fix, and it makes sense monetarily to do that. We call that curable. And then some depreciation is incurable. It doesn't make sense money-wise to correct the deficiency. So let's talk about curable first. The cost to correct the condition or the defect is less than the amount of the value that is restored. So when you replace a roof, obviously you're going to get that money back when you try to sell that property. It makes sense. So if a condition is economically feasible to repair, if the correcting the problem would add to, or at least add as much to the market value of the cost to repair it, then it makes sense to go ahead and take care of the problem. Replacing windows is an example of that, painting a house, obviously. There are expenses associated with those things, but you're going to get that money back out if you do try to sell the property. Now we also have incurable depreciation. With incurable, the cost to correct the condition or the defect is greater than the amount of value that would be restored. Now, there are some types, particularly of functional obsolescence, that could potentially be incurable, but most of the time incurable depreciation is going to come from external obsolescence, something that is external to the property. So that's what you're going to see more often. So take a look at this picture right here. We've got, it looks like a commercial area, place where you can eat, get a beer, buy a TV. Looks like maybe a massage, exotic dancing. I don't know what's going on the street. But we also have, it looks like a residential home slap dab in the middle of all of it. So would this be an example of functional obsolescence or not? So let's talk about physical deterioration. Now, all building components belong in one of these categories. So we have deferred maintenance, which is curable, deferred maintenance, which is incurable, short-lived items, and long-lived items. So let's talk about each one. Now, I know I had already mentioned that most of the time physical deterioration is curable, and that is true. And so examples of that would be painting a house, replacing a roof, replacing broken windows, that kind of thing. There are some situations, which they're rare, but you could possibly have deferred maintenance that is incurable. So let me give you an example. I had an old farmhouse listed several years ago, and they had maintained the house really well, but it had a detached garage. The garage was probably 40 yards away from the house. It was on the back of the property, and they had never maintained it, and so it literally was about to fall in. So in a situation like that, it makes a lot more sense just to tear it down and build a new garage than it does to try to repair what's already existing. We also have short-lived items in a house. So short-lived items are things that you anticipate if you live in a house long enough that you're going to have to start to replace. So these would be things like water heaters, heating and air conditioning systems, HVAC systems, the roof. These are short-lived items. Eventually, you're going to have to replace them. I mean, this also applies to things like appliances, whether it's the dishwasher or the stove or the refrigerator. And then we have long-lived items in a house. These are things that actually should last the entire life of the building, like the walls, the floors, the door, and I'm not referring to carpet. Obviously, you have to replace carpet. But if you have a hardwood floor in a house, it should last the economic life of the house. And how long is the economic life of a house? We've talked about this before, but it's typically 100 years. So a residential property has an economic life of 100 years. So these are things that should last the entire time that the property is operable. Walls, floors, hardwood floors, doors. Now, I know you guys are students, right? So you've seen doors with holes in them. You should not have to replace doors, right? But every once in a while, you might have to do that, especially if it's a rental property. So let's move on to functional obsolescence. Let's look at some examples of functional obsolescence that are curable and some that are also incurable. So let's look at curable functional obsolescence first. Let's say that we have a house and it's a 2-story house and there's 2 bedrooms upstairs, but there's no bathroom. That would be a perfect example of functional obsolescence. That house is not going to function very well because there's no bathroom upstairs, right? So adding a bathroom upstairs, maybe converting a closet to a bathroom would make a lot of sense. Curable functional obsolescence. Another example of curable would be a replacement or a substitution. So it could be that you have really outdated appliances in the kitchen, and so you replace those with new, state-of-the-art, brand new, beautiful new appliances. You're good to go. Another example of curable would be a super adequacy or an over improvement. So let's talk about an example of a super adequacy. A super adequacy is going to be a component that's above the standard of quality. I showed a property once. It was in the Pebblestone subdivision, which is off of Highway 24, right past Mill Creek Park. And the houses in that area are, $200,000 to $250,000 homes. There's nothing fancy about them. They're brick on the exterior. They're nice on the inside, but there's nothing fancy. Standard kitchen. And the house that I was showing that particular day, when we walked in, the first thing that you could smell was curry. And so you could tell someone had been cooking in the kitchen. And as you walked in and walked around the corner of the initial foyer, you could see that the kitchen was totally upgraded because the lady that lived there and was selling the house was a chef. And so she had commercial grade appliances in this kitchen. And so that's an example of curable functional obsolescence because you can take out those commercial grade appliances and you can replace them with something that is standard and no one's even going to know the difference, right? So you could replace a super adequacy, something that's sort of above and beyond, with something that is standard, and you're good to go. Now we also have incurable, which would be a deficiency in the property. Something that is missing that we can't fix. Say, for instance, you have a house in a neighborhood, 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes, they all have 2-car garages except yours. Yours is the only house that doesn't have a 2-car garage. And we know that we need to conform to all the properties in our particular area in order to get the maximum value when we try to sell, right? So we have a deficiency. So you go in and you say, well, let's add a garage. You go and you look at the lot and you look at the side of the house where the garage needs to be, and you realize that you have wetlands on that side, or maybe there's not enough room to actually add a garage because you're too close to your neighbor's property line. That would be an example of a deficiency that you cannot cure. You cannot add the garage that you need because either it's wetlands or you don't have enough space. And so that would be an incurable example of functional obsolescence. We also have incurable, which will be a super adequacy. So this goes back to kind of someone who's going overboard. I had a builder once who wanted me to look at a spec home that he had built, and we were looking at the house and he was telling me all the specifics about it. We got up to the attic and he was telling me about this spray foam insulation that he had put in, and he was talking about how wonderful it is, and he said, it's so good, we put 2 coats. Now I'm laughing because you don't need but one. And so he paid extra for all of that. That's a super adequacy. And he's not going to be able to get that money back out when he sells that house because most people understand, he was a brand new builder, by the way. Most people understand that doesn't make any sense, right? You're going overboard. You're doing something you don't have to do. So that's an example of incurable obsolescence. Measuring accrued depreciation is the attempt to estimate actual loss in market value compared to a new building. Now, ways that you can do that are listed here. We have straight line or age life. We have sales data or market method, cost to cure or breakdown method, and we also have the capitalized income method. Straight line depreciation relates specifically to the age of the building. Loss in value due to age is assumed to be directly proportional to the so-called age life of the structure. Now let's talk about the age life of a structure. When we're talking about residential properties are given what they call an economic life. Residences typically are given an economic life of 100 years. So it should last at least that long. So in the example that we have on the slide here, we have a residence that is a 100-year economic life, but it's 25 years old. So that means that we're going to give it 25% depreciation. So pretty simple math on that one. We just talked about straight line depreciation. And straight line depreciation looks at the actual age of the house. Appraisers, on the other hand, though, have to consider effective age as well. We've talked about this a little bit. Remember how we talked about the fact that some people look older than they really are and some people look younger than they really are? Houses are exactly the same way. So as an appraiser, you have to consider the effective age of the property. If the house has been really, really well taken care of, it might be 50 years old, but it might have an effective age of only 30 years. So that has to be considered. In the example here on this slide, we have a building that's 65 years old. That is the actual age, but it's been really well taken care of. So the effective age is only 35 years. The economic life would then be only 35%. So as an appraiser, that experience and being able to figure out what the effective age of a house is, given the improvements or additions or renovations or whatever it is that they've done to the property, that's going to make a difference. Sales data or market method looks at the sale price versus the replacement cost. So what we're looking at here is comparable sales, and we're trying to figure out what the depreciation on those comparable sales is going to be. And we're going to look at the sale price versus the replacement cost. In this slide, they say reproduction cost. It's the same, okay? I know that there's a difference between the two things, but they refer to reproduction in these slides more than they do replacement, even though replacement is more common. So we have a reproduction cost new as of the date of the sale is $200,000, but the sale price of this particular property was $240,000. If you subtract the land, that gives you an improvement value of $160,000. The difference between the reproduction cost new and the improvement value now is going to be $40,000. If you divide that by the cost of the new improvements, the reproduction cost new, that's 20%. Okay, so in this example, this property is 20 years old. So 20% divided by 20 is going to be 1%. So it's going to be an annual depreciation of 1% for this particular property. If you do several different comparables and figure out the depreciation for each one, then you can take an average of what that percentage would be. The cost to cure or breakdown method is a method that is rarely used by appraisers, but it's still a method that we need to discuss. So in a situation like this, you have an appraiser who goes out to a property, and maybe he finds several different issues with the property. Maybe the property has a defect. Maybe there's a condition in the property that reduces value. Remember when I told you guys about the house that we appraised the very first time I taught this course, and it had the mold on the wall? That could possibly be an example of a situation where an appraiser would have to do a cost to cure method, where you send the appraisal to the investor and the investor says, hey, wait a second, that mold issue could cause a lot of problems. It could decrease the value of this house significantly because it could be really expensive to remediate. So we need to know how much would it cost to fix it. So in this method, the appraiser is actually asked to figure out how much would it cost to fix this problem. Now, in that mold situation with the house that we actually appraised, it was just a bottle of Clorox that was taken care of. But mold could have been in the crawl space of the house, and when it gets into the crawl space, it can cause a lot of damage. So the cost to cure method is going to be one of those situations where you have to figure out exactly what it would cost to fix it. Where are you going to find those numbers? You can call contractors that you know, and they can give you a really, really good idea. In the situation of a mold issue, like the example I was giving you, you can call a mold specialist to come out and he'll tell you exactly how much it would cost to remediate the issue. So there's lots of things that you can do there, but this is not the kind of method that appraisers are going to have to utilize very often. The capitalized income method is used with income producing properties. And we're going to talk a lot more about the income approach, obviously, when we get to chapters 13 and 14. But it's also referred to as the rental loss method. So what they're doing here is they're trying to estimate a loss in value, and where is that loss in value coming from? Is there a single cause that is causing it? Is it from several different causes? Is there a reason why we are getting a decrease in value on a particular property? Is it because of the age? Is it because of the location? Is it because of the building itself? So there's lots of different issues that you look at here. The capitalized income method includes what we call the gross income multiplier. And the gross income multiplier is a typical ratio that's found between price and gross scheduled rent for similar properties. So whenever we're estimating the capitalized income method, the gross income multiplier can be really helpful. A summary of a cost approach example. We have the reproduction cost of the specific improvements. You've got the living area, the covered patio, the garage, and then you have a total. And then we have all of the depreciation, and they list it separately. They have physical deterioration, they have functional obsolescence, and economic obsolescence. Then we're going to subtract all of our depreciation. We're going to add the value of our land back to the reproduction cost or the replacement cost of the structure, and we have our answer, $191,000. We're going to do an example that is similar to this in the homework that you guys are going to turn in, where you have to break down the different physical deterioration, functional obsolescence, economic obsolescence. So this might be a good slide for you to refer back to. So this is what the cost approach section of the UR/AR form looks like. And so whenever you guys start to complete your appraisal project, I'm going to give you the specifics that you need for the amounts per square foot. And obviously it's a brand new house, so there's no depreciation. So I'll also give you the value of the land. But you will need to fill out this section, so make sure that you take a look at it.